This is Product Management. Welcome. We're here to learn from brilliant minds across numerous disciplines that fuel the modern product manager. Let's take a deep dive into user experience, innovation, design, development, metrics, and more. Do you want more product management tactics and research? Subscribe at thisisproductmanagement.com to receive the latest updates from this podcast.
I'm your host, Mike Fishbein. This is Product Management, a podcast produced by Alpha UX. Welcome to our third episode, airing from our headquarters in New York City. In this episode, I'll be interviewing Nir Eyal, the author of Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products. Listen on to find out how habit formation can replace expensive ads and other spammy marketing tactics. Hey Nir, why are habits so important to product managers?
Yeah, so habits are these behaviors that occur with little or no conscious thought. It's about half of what we do every day, day in and day out, is done from these impulses that we're not consciously aware of these habits, but it turns out that a large degree of what we do every day is driven by these unconscious impulses. And it turns out that companies can create a tremendous amount of value for their customers as well as economic value by building in habits into their product design so that users no longer require expensive marketing. They don't require spammy emails and messages, that they're prompted to use the product on their own. They're self-prompted to use the product by forming these habits with the product.
User engagement is product management. I'll candidly admit, I didn't know any of that. Before going further, who in the world is Nir Eyal, I wondered, and how did he learn all of this?
Yeah, so I started a couple tech companies, and the last one was at the intersection of gaming and advertising. The intersection of these two industries, which frankly are dependent on mind control. You know, advertisers don't spend all that money for their health. They spend that money because it changes user behavior to get people to buy the things they want them to buy. And then the gaming industry, man, is very dependent on changing user behavior to drive people down this path, this design path during a game experience. And so at the intersection of those two industries, I had this vantage point to see a lot of experiments, to see companies and products come and go. And I could start picking up on what were the patterns behind why some products became so engaging and could sustain user interest while others never picked up steam, could never get anybody to care. And so after my last company was acquired, I started doing a lot of research into the why behind these techniques. Because what I found was in the industry that a lot of people use these techniques. They use the deeper psychology of why people do it. They didn't know why these techniques worked. There wasn't names for them. They couldn't identify why these things work. They just did it because their competitor did it or because that's the way they'd done it before. And I didn't find any guidebook on how to build habit-forming products. And so that's the book I wanted to write. I wanted to write a product manager's guide to building habit-forming products.
This seems to contradict a lot of what we know about user behavior and product management. We're taught to identify problems and experiment with solutions. Now it seems Nir is telling us that all we need to do is get our customers hooked and we can just build anything.
I don't think you can form a habit without a pain point. Right? So the first step of this model that I outline in my book, this model is called the hook. And all these habit-forming products have these hooks built in to the design of the product. The hook has these four basic steps. And what the hook is actually, let me back up. What the hook is, it is experience designed to connect the user's problem to the company's solution with enough frequency to form a habit. So it's all about connecting problems and solutions. And I'm a big believer in the lean startup methodology, but here's the problem. So I bought into lean startup and customer development, hook, line, and sinker. At my last company, we lived and breathed lean startup methodologies, but here's where I constantly got stuck. The most expensive part of the lean startup methodologies, as proposed by Eric Ries and Steve Blank, this loop of build, measure, learn. The most expensive part is the building phase. Building is where the blood, sweat, and tears and money all go. The measuring and learning, that's fun. That's easy. In comparison, it's the building that's hard. And so what I propose is a new methodology, a framework based on the things that users can't necessarily articulate. Remember, customer development and lean startup is terrific for figuring out what customers want that they can tell you they want. But what I propose is to look deeper than what they can tell you they want, because there's a lot of behaviors that users will do that they are unable to articulate. So I propose looking to consumer psychology to understand some of these drivers of human behavior. Why? So that we can build the right things sooner. At my last company, we would, have all these ideas for what we should build, and deciding what we should build was kind of guesswork, right? Should we build what the loudest customer tells us to build? Should we build what the investors say we should build? Should we build what the CEO says we should build? What do we build? And so what I want to give is a framework based in consumer psychology that helps us build the right thing sooner so that we have less waste in the process. And so just to describe this hook quickly, to answer your question around, is a pain point necessary? A pain point is absolutely necessary. It starts first with this internal trigger. Just an overview of the model, every hook has these 4 basic steps of a trigger, an action, reward, and investment. And it's through successive cycles through these hooks that these habits are formed. So triggers, the ultimate goal of a habit-forming product is to create a mental association with these internal triggers. So that every time we feel a certain emotion, we're in a certain situation, a routine, we automatically do these behaviors with little or no conscious thought. So for example, when I'm bored, I hop on YouTube or Reddit. When I'm lonely, I check Facebook. When I'm uncertain, I Google. These instant associations with these negative emotions that prompt us to pass through the hook.
So it seems that hooks don't replace pain points at all. They emphasize them and reinforce solutions. Nir talked a lot about optimizing the product roadmap, but it wasn't clear how product managers could test for hooking potential.
So there's this technique I outline in the book, in a chapter of the book called habit testing. And habit testing is this 3-phase process to help you identify what, if any, habits you have in your product and how you can expand that behavior of your habituated users to the rest of your user base. And so here's the 3-step process. Step 1 is to identify. You can define what a habituated user looks like. They use the product once a day, 3 times a day, 3 times a week, whatever it is that you think is the level that a habituated user would use your product. Identify those users. Right? So the first step is to identify who are the users that are doing this behavior. Understand what's unique about those users so that you can codify. The next step is to codify what step those users took to become habituated to your product. And then the third step, after identify, codify, the third step is modify. So change the path, change what I call the habit path that all users take to become habituated. So you identify the users that are habituated, you codify what steps they took by looking at the data of how did users pass through this UX, and then finally modify the product so that everybody follows that same path.
This got me thinking, which companies do user engagement really well? What case studies can we learn from?
There's several. I mean, if you think of the usual suspects of the products that kind of came out of nowhere over the past several years, maybe the past 5 to 10 years, and within a blink of an eye, they're changing user behavior. They're on a massive scale. They're making hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, and they're touching hundreds of millions, if not billions of users. And so it's companies like Facebook or Twitter, or Instagram, Pinterest, WhatsApp, Slack in the enterprise space. There's all these companies that have successfully formed these habits in users' day-to-day lives. So Facebook and Slack are 2 great examples. They both have beautiful hooks built into them. The Facebook hook, for example, the internal trigger for opening up Facebook might be loneliness, right? This pain point, this negative emotion that we feel that we seek to escape from. And so the brain over time forms these associations with the problem and the solution by passing through this hook. So you're feeling lonesome, you're seeking connection, you open the app, that's the action. The variable reward, the third step of the hook, is what you see in your feed. And there's a lot of variability here. There's a lot of uncertainty about what did people post? What are the comments going to say? How many likes did something get? High degree of variability that keeps us checking this product. This uncertainty about what we might find the next time we engage with the product. Incidentally, the purpose of the variable reward is to scratch the itch. What happens to my boredom and my loneliness the first time I open the product? As soon as I open the product and I take the action, well, the variable reward scratches that itch. I'm no longer seeking connection. I'm no longer bored. That pain point is alleviated. And then the investment phase of the hook is to ask the user to do a little bit of work to increase the likelihood of the next pass. And this happens in 2 ways. The first way is that investments load the next trigger. So, for example, when I leave a comment for somebody or I like something, I friend a person, I'm loading the next trigger because doing so gives the company permission to message me in the future, to bring me back through the hook again, through an external trigger, what's called an external trigger, that gives me some information for what to do next. The other way that investments increase the likelihood of the next pass is by storing value. So the more photos I add to Facebook, the more data I give the company, the more content, the more followers, the more investment I put into successive cycles through the hook, the more important it becomes to me. I become more and more dependent on the product, the more I invest in it. I store value in the product. A lot that they're doing extremely well. I mean, that company has continued to impress. I think habits are a huge competitive advantage. I think what Facebook realizes, and I think what Zuckerberg should get a lot of credit for, is that he realizes that Facebook of the future will not be the Facebook of today. And so anytime somebody threatens his habits, his users' habits, he buys those people. All right? I mean, that's why Facebook paid $22 billion for WhatsApp. That's why Zuckerberg paid $1 billion for Instagram, and everybody laughed at him, right? Remember when he bought Instagram? What? He bought this crazy, silly photo service that, big deal. $1 billion he paid for it. Man, did he overpay. Turns out if you separate Instagram from Facebook today, Instagram is worth $35 billion. So who's laughing now? So Zuckerberg understands the power of habits, and anything that threatens his users' habits, he will first try and copy, right? He tried to create some products, and if he can't, then he ends up buying those products.
Nir mentioned Mark Zuckerberg originally trying to copy Instagram. We saw the same thing with Google building Google+. It seems oftentimes not to work. But what would it take to steal habits from another company?
So habits are a huge competitive advantage, but they're not impenetrable. So the way you steal a competitor's habit, an incumbent's habit, is one of three ways. Number one, you pass users through the hook with greater velocity. So if you can figure out something in the interface to make passing through trigger, action, reward, investment faster, you have a hope of capturing a habit. The second way is if you can increase the frequency with which users pass through this hook. So that typically happens with some kind of interface change. So when we went from desktop to laptop to mobile and now to wearable, every time that happened, accessing these technologies became something we could do more frequently. And so the habit deck got reshuffled. So now the old habits had to be ported over to the new interfaces, and because we could pass through the hook more frequently, new market entrants had a chance. So Facebook was built for the desktop or the laptop interface, where you had lots of real estate. You could cram a lot into a web page. But, it wasn't a mobile-first product like Instagram was, which was really about this social network built for the mobile phone. That's, principally occurred, that new habit occurred because this product was optimized to be used on the mobile phone and therefore was used more frequently. And then finally, the third way to capture a competitor's habit is by making the reward more rewarding. So if you can be the kind of product that is used and makes the product more rewarding than the competitor's product, if your product is more rewarding, then that's another way that you can capture habits. So for example, Zuckerberg offered $3 billion to Snapchat. Because think about it, if you got a message from Snapchat or a message on Facebook, which reward is more rewarding? To open that app, which one are you going to check first? Are you going to check Aunt Matilda's Facebook post, or are you going to check the Snapchat post from somebody you've been flirting with? You're going to check Snapchat. The reward is more rewarding. And that's principally driven by the fact that Snapchat messages explode. So people's discretion about what they're willing to send, they're willing to send less discretion. They send funny and flirty and sexy pictures, which make the reward more rewarding.
This concept of making a product more rewarding than a competitor's product redefines the way you think about competition. You are not just competing on a feature-by-feature basis. You are competing on which feature resolves the user's pain point in a more meaningful and fundamental way from a psychological perspective. Let's dig deeper into that. Why and how does Facebook compete with Snapchat to solve for boredom or loneliness?
So variable rewards comes out of the work of B.F. Skinner, the father of operant conditioning. You might remember Skinner from your Psych 101 class back in college. Skinner did some very interesting experiments. The one that comes to mind is he took these pigeons, he put them in a little box, he gave them a disc to peck at, and every time the pigeon pecked at this disc, they would receive a reward, a little food pellet. And what Skinner found was that when he gave this reward on a predictable schedule, so pigeon would click the disc, receive the food pellet, he basically could train these pigeons to peck at the disc whenever they were hungry. But then Skinner did something a little bit different. He introduced an intermittent schedule of reward, a variable reward. So sometimes the pigeons would peck at the disc, nothing would happen. The next time the pigeon would peck at the disc, they would receive a reward. And what Skinner observed was the rate of response, the number of times these pigeons pecked at this disc, increased when the reward was given on a variable schedule of reinforcement. So in all sorts of products that we find most engaging, most habit-forming, the things that capture our attention and won't let go, you will find these variable rewards. This is something that Facebook is very much struggling with, in that if the ratio between the mundane and the interesting gets out of whack, if it's boring, if it's not rewarding enough, people leave, right? So you have to find this right ratio. And of course, Facebook has to balance this with monetization. And now that the network has gotten so big and everybody's on it, I don't know if I find a post from my Aunt Matilda so interesting. I certainly don't find advertisers' posts all that interesting. So Facebook uses these algorithms to figure out what you think is interesting based on your behavior, based on your investment in the product, what you like, what you click on, what you see, to modify the feed. It's actually an advantage, a huge advantage, that Facebook has over Twitter. Because Twitter, actually, they've figured out some new innovations, Twitter, to curate your feed. But the fact that your Twitter feed is happening in real time, it's not algorithmically programmed like Facebook's feed. Facebook certainly doesn't show you everything that your friends do. They show you what they think you're going to be most interested in to keep the variable rewards at the right ratio.
Now that we have a better understanding of rewards, it's important, in all of product management, by the way, to have a repeatable method for testing and measuring your progress during implementation.
The state of the art that I know of is to track by cohorts. So you define what level of usage would you expect a habitual user to engage with a product. It depends on your product. There's no magic number. So some products, it would make sense for a habitual user to use every day, maybe multiple times a day, maybe once every few days, maybe once a week. And so the first step is to identify, what does a habitual user look like? How frequently would they engage? Then make a change in your product, and then track by cohort. It actually doesn't matter what that number is. Just pick a number and insist on relentless forward progress, right? So pick that number of the frequency, what percentage of your users you call habituated based on this criteria of how often they use the product, and then make changes to the product using the hook model. Figure out what your hook is, trigger, action, reward, investment, make changes to your product accordingly, and see how that affects the percentage of users who you define as habituated.
So we've got a great understanding of user engagement and habit formation from Nir. By now, you should know what's next. That's right, the benchmark. Let's see how Nir reflects on the next series of questions we ask to all our interviewees. We like to think of this section of our podcast as our own reward to get you hooked. Very meta.
Okay, so how do I eat my own dog food? So let me be clear that not every business model needs a habit. There's plenty of businesses that can use the psychology of user behavior without necessarily requiring a habit. So you can piecemeal understand, hey, this is this principle out of consumer psychology. How can I make my experience better? How can I design a better product without necessarily building a habit? If your business requires a habit, if the way you create and deliver value necessitates people coming back on their own, like these companies I discussed around, if you think about Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and Pinterest and WhatsApp, these companies couldn't survive without habits. They would go out of business if they had to spend money on ads to bring users back. So those businesses necessitate a habit. So they have to have all 4 steps of the hook. So if your business is like that, you too have to have these 4 steps of the hook. Now, as an author, I don't need my book to be habit forming. A book is something you buy, you read once, and you don't necessarily read again and again and again. It doesn't have infinite variability. It you understand the principles, and that's about it. That being said, I fall into that former category. I do this for fun. I'm not writing books to make money. There's not that much money in books, and I've started 2 companies, thankfully, that exited. So I'm not doing this to get rich. I'm doing this because I struggled as a product manager for a long time and know how hard it is to create a product that people actually use. And so that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. But that being said, I used a lot of the principles in the book piecemeal. So just one quick example off the top of my head, the investment phase. So I did something crazy with my book that, no publisher would allow you to do, but I kind of did anyway when I self-published the book. I allowed 900 of my blog readers to read my entire manuscript on Google Docs. The deal was, if you read my book online and provided comments, right? What did you like, what you didn't like, edited here and there, provided feedback on the manuscript, then you became a contributor. And the deal was that I would put your name at the back of the book, and it's in the back of the book till this day, everybody's name who helped me with the book. Now, why did I do that? Number one, I really did need help, and I wanted to improve the book, and I can't thank my contributors enough. They did an amazing job. The book got much, much better because of the comments that they left. It was also a way to build investment. That by people putting a bit of effort into the product, by leaving these comments, by investing in the book, they also became my advocates. They became people who I could trigger in the future and say, hey, look, you helped with the book. Now it's available on store shelves, right? Now you can go pick it up. And it made the product better for them with use because they helped me edit the book. They could see their edits in the final copy of the book. They could find their name in the back. So I used many of these principles of consumer psychology to make a more engaging product. Yeah, so how do I do user testing and customer development in my own business and my own book? Well, my blog is a form of user testing. So I don't work on products per se anymore. I just really like to write, and I really enjoy kind of answering these burning questions that I have in my own mind. And so seeing the response from readers is kind of how I do user testing. So I never set out to write Hooked. I didn't sit down and say, I'm going to write a book on habit-forming products. I started writing small blog posts. Right? I started kind of seeing what people are interested in. These were topics that I really thought were interesting, and then seeing the response from people and learning what questions they wanted answered. My product is kind of making product managers' lives easier by helping them know these principles of how to make more habit-forming products, so I could test that slowly, one blog post at a time. I am reading a book called The Half-Life of Facts, which is a very interesting book about how what we think is true degrades over time, how what we think is a fact can change within a lifetime or a generation's lifetime. What's a product management nightmare? I think it's terrible anytime we build a product in seclusion, when we don't have customer feedback, when we don't do lean startup methodologies and customer development. I think that's very important to do. But what's even worse is when you follow them to a T and you still build the wrong stuff. That's kind of a nightmare too, right? Because, frankly, it's the easy route is to do what we used to do, waterfall development. You stick the engineers in a room, they code up what you designed for them, you don't hear from them for 6 months to a year, they come out, they say, here's the product, and, big surprise, nobody wants to use it. That's the pretty common scenario. That's kind of easy when you think about it in terms of a decision to make, how to build product. That's the lazy manager's directive. Go build the product, do what I tell you. The enlightened perspective is, no, we have to do customer development. We have to get user feedback. It's much harder to do if you think about it than just saying build what I tell you to build, right? Because then you have to be open to feedback. You have to judge what we build, what we don't build. But interestingly enough, the scariest scenario is that you do that and your damn product still doesn't get used. Right? That's the worst of all. You took the hard route and you got the same results. And so that's really the nightmare that I try and prevent, that frankly I experienced too many times because we couldn't figure out what to build. And so that's where this framework is helpful, is to use these deeper psychological principles to build the right thing sooner.
If you're like me, there's a lot more you want to learn from Nir. Here's how you can.
Yeah, thanks. This was a pleasure. So my blog is at nirandfar.com. Nir is spelled like my first name, N-I-R, and far.com. The book is Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products. It's available wherever books are sold.
That's our show. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, this is Mike Fishbein from Alpha UX.
More product management tactics and research? Subscribe at thisisproductmanagement.com to receive the latest updates from this podcast.